first and foremost, everyone, thank you for joining us for this week's National Speaker Series with Scholars of Finance. As many of you know, I'm Ross Overline. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance. It's great to see all of your commitment to developing yourselves as leaders. We've been inspired watching our community develop and grow in light of all the recent changes caused by this pandemic. And tonight, we're honored to have Eff Martin join us to help teach us amidst this time. Eff will be speaking on servant leadership and the lessons that he's learned from leading high caliber teams throughout his very storied career. I'll share more about Eff and his bio. I want to share a little bit of background. Eff has become one of my own dear friends and has become a very important mentor to me personally and to many others. He really embodies servant leadership. I mean, in the time that I've known Eff, he's already had a strong and positive impact on my life, helping me become a better leader, focus on serving others amidst the crisis. And over the past several months, Eff has even begun helping us think through how to achieve our mission at Scholars of Finance as well. And I'm really grateful that all of you have the chance to, all of us together have the chance to learn from him today. We will begin by hearing from Eff for the first half of our event today, and then move into a Q&A session for the last portion. If you have a question, as usual, please raise your hand using the chat function in Zoom. And then after doing this, you'll be added to a queue. After we get through prepared remarks, we'll start calling on people to do a live Q&A. And then make sure to turn on your video, introduce yourself, your name, where you're calling in from, which chapter you're at, so that Eff can hear your question live. With that, I will share a little bit about Eff and then turn it over to Eff to get us started. So Eff Martin is a private investor and founding partner of Anthos Capital. In addition to this, he is a former general partner and managing director of Goldman Sachs and Company. Throughout Eff's career, he spent 32 years in the investment banking industry, of which the last 22 were at Goldman Sachs. He was one of the founders of the firm's high technology business and became a partner in 1998. While there, he also led Goldman Sachs's coverage and notable transactions for many of the most important and prominent technology companies in the world today, including Apple, Cisco Systems, HP, Juniper Networks, and Microsoft. Eff is active in a broad array of other community affairs as well. He currently serves on the governing or advisory boards of Pepperdine University, the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, the San Francisco Symphony, Music at Menlo, the Center for Conscientious Leadership, and the Dallas Willard Center for Spiritual Formation. He's also a past chairman of the Board of Menlo School and has served on the boards of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, the Hoover Institution, Stanford Athletics, the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, Phillips Brooks School, and the Greater Ravalli Foundation. Eff's been incredibly involved as a member of his communities. He received a BA and a Master's of Mechanical Engineering from Rice University, where he became a member of the Phi Beta Kappa and Tau Beta Pi honor societies, and he received his MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business in 1973. Eff is currently engaged in several areas of Christian spiritual formation ministry, discipling, teaching, and leading retreats, and is an elder at his church, Menlo Church in California. So with that, if in usual Scholars of Finance fashion, if everybody can unmute your line, and please give Eff a warm welcome and a round of applause for joining us today. Eff, we will turn it over to you to share your wisdom with us today.
Great, thanks Ross, I appreciate the introduction. And hi everyone, I am very glad to have this opportunity to speak to all of you. I grew up in Oklahoma, and there's a saying there that just when you think you've seen it all, you find out you ain't seen nothing yet. And this COVID-19 crisis is shaking the modern world in unprecedented ways. And it's very difficult to predict where it will take us, either in the pandemic or in the economic crisis, which is already ensuing. One thing, though, that we can say without reservation is that the need for thoughtful and principled leadership will also be unprecedented in both scale and scope. Interestingly, leaders in finance, including my former partners, Hank Paulson and now Steve Mnuchin, have been extremely prominent in dealing with our two most recent financial crises. In desperate times like these, leadership needs to be directed for the good of others rather than for our own gain. And that's why I want to speak to you about the topic of servant leadership. I will briefly touch on what servant leadership is, but I suspect you already have a pretty good grasp of what it entails. The words themselves are pretty good descriptors. The main thing I want to raise for your consideration is how we can become servant leaders and why it is so difficult. I have quite a few battle scars from my career, indeed, and I hope a few of my experiences will prove instructive as well. On a personal note, I want to mention that I've been a Christian for most of my life, and my faith has informed much of the way that I've looked at life. And I just can't tell my story apart from it. I realize that many of you may hold other beliefs, but I think my experiences will still prove widely relevant. Although modern scholarship in the field of servant leadership only dates back about 50 years, which surprised me a great deal, the concept has been around for most of recorded history. We just finished the Easter season, and in the Last Supper, Jesus washed the disciples' feet and told them that they should in turn wash one another's feet and be servants. These concepts occur in many, many other contexts as well. More recently, the phrase servant leadership was coined by an academic, Robert K. Greenleaf in The Servant Leader, an essay that he published in 1970. And in that essay, Greenleaf gives a very good short description, and I will quote, "The servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. That person is sharply different from one who is leader first, perhaps because of the need to assuage an unusual power drive or to acquire material possessions. The leader first and the servant first are two extreme types. Between them, there are shadings and blends that are part of the infinite variety of human nature. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test, and difficult to administer, is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely to themselves become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? A servant leader focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong. While traditional leadership involves the accumulation and exercise of power by one at the top of the pyramid, servant leadership is different. The servant leader shares power, puts the need of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. Now, I think that's a pretty clear description and describes the concept well. And I know that part of the curriculum of Scholars of Finance is to develop a mission and a personal leadership plan. And I would be very surprised if most of you who've done that did not instinctively incorporate elements of servant leadership into your goals. This is a good thing, but I think the more difficult task is to take the journey of actually becoming a servant leader. If we want to get into the general topic of servant leadership more thoroughly, we can do so in the Q&A, but I'd like to turn to what I think is the better and more relevant topic: how to actually become a servant leader. I'm part of a group called the Center for Conscientious Leadership, which teaches classes at Santa Clara University and operates continuing program for alums and other young people of similar interests. And our motto is, before you can lead others, you must first learn to lead yourself. Another way of putting this is that you cannot become a truly good leader until you first become a good person. Now, I am not saying that one has to be a good person to become a powerful leader who enjoys great personal success. History is full of conquerors and selfish people in every walk of life who obtain personal glory and riches, usually at the expense and pain of other people. But what I am saying is that if you are not a good person, you will not be able to help other people to themselves become good people and flourish as human beings, the goal of servant leadership. Now, there's a fascinating aspect of the quest to become a servant leader, which is that even well-intentioned, good-hearted people have a hard time with it. And I certainly fall into that category. I became serious about my Christian faith in high school and have intellectually desired to serve others and be a good person for many, many years now. I think I've made progress, but it has been a genuine struggle. Why? I've come to understand that it goes back to the fact that what I said I wanted to be, what I affirmed as my deepest values, were not what were really driving me on the inside. And although I sincerely desired to be a Christian servant helping others, in the depths of my soul, I believed that it was achievement, wealth, and influence which would give me value. The priest and author Henry Nouwen described the ideas that our achievements, possessions, and reputation, or what people say about us, would give us value. But he called these things the three great lies because they don't give us any lasting value. And without wanting to, or even realizing I was doing so, I had bought into these three great lies. And this was a product of many things in my makeup and formative years, and it ran deep. Now, even though I was sophisticated enough to articulate some fairly clever ways of reconciling my faith with this drive for success, the truth is that it was a rationalization so that I could aspire to noble goals while still getting what I really wanted. And fortunately, I became painfully aware of this conflict in me just before entering the business world after getting my MBA. And for all these years since, I've tried to resist the three great lies and to become more and more concerned with becoming the kind of person who loves and serves others. But as I mentioned, I have had so many failures along the way. And I think God has changed me over time, but the things that are deepest in us don't change overnight. And so it has been a very long journey. Now, just as one example, in my latter years at Goldman, I kind of made enough progress that I was able to, at least in some part, dedicate myself to helping the younger people there and giving them the credit for successes in business rather than trying to make sure I was recognized. Goldman has a very sophisticated review system, and this actually showed up in my reviews, as well as in the fact that I experienced a much greater sense of satisfaction. And in truth, I think it makes a difference in just about every human relationship when you actually start caring more about the other person than yourself. So let's turn for a moment to some practical steps to learning about becoming servant leaders. The first step, I think, is to learn to correctly assess who we are and why we are that way. And my own disconnect between what I said were my values and what they really were is a prime example of this. And it's very hard to correct a problem when you either don't admit to yourself or can't see that you have it. And so getting a handle on that is just crucial. And we need to make conscious efforts to get an accurate picture of ourselves. And there are a very large number of tools, fortunately, to help do this. First of all, Scholars of Finance uses a workbook in which you consider your values and where they came from. And in our Center for Conscientious Leadership at Santa Clara and in the alumni group, we spend quite a bit of time analyzing the events and important element of our lives going all the way back to childhood to help us understand what drives us. And this is not a new concept at all. Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living, as quoted in Plato's Republic, and is just, I think, a truth of human existence. There are so many other tools too. I'm quite fond of one called the Enneagram, which uses a battery of questions to evaluate your personality characteristics and tendencies. It then provides guidance to help you understand your strengths, weaknesses, and the ways of relating to yourself, others, and the world. It identifies how you act in a good way and a bad way, in good times and in hard times. And it's only a tool, but it's actually very instructive about helping you start to understand why you fail or why you do well in certain circumstances. And it's a very helpful way to help us understand ourselves. You know, I'm also a big fan of individual counseling as an excellent way to overcome serious issues and disorders. When I grew up, going to counseling was a sign of weakness and something that you would hide. And I think that life has proved that to be baloney. I have a friend who's the CEO of a major corporation who said that he went to counseling and he views it as a competitive edge. He actually sees it as a source of strength, and I would agree with him. Now, this list could go on, but the point I want to make here is that we have a need to embark on a conscious voyage of self-discovery. Second, I think that we've got to go deep inside ourselves to find a core belief which will allow us to do the right thing, even when it appears to have very negative consequences. Many times in life's more difficult situations, we need to find a source of courage and conviction which will allow us to do the right thing to help others, even when it might be very painful to us. But sometimes it's really hard to do something good when you think you'll just be murdered for it, that it will mean the end. And this is, I think, particularly important now as we see from this COVID-19 that life is frequently not in our control. And honestly, maybe it's rarely in our control. And it requires some sort of faith in the future to act outside our own self-interest. When I was at another firm prior to Goldman Sachs, I was living in San Francisco, and I kind of hit my 7th year when it was, time to actually run something and bring in business and do something important. And I was offered the job of starting the energy group and in the investment banking department and leading it. And they said, God, we'd love to have you do it. We want you to come to New York because that's where our firm's headquartered and you need to be here. And having, grown up in Oklahoma and been associated with the oil business and my family, I said, man, this sounds great. Let me think about it. And I came home and talked to Patty, my wife, and we were actually very open to it. But as we continued to evaluate it over a little bit of time, we started to remember this struggle that I, obviously have continued to have about where are my values. And as we went further and further into it, we decided that it might not be a good thing for me to go to the heart of Wall Street and throw myself into this new effort there where, you can cut sort of the air with power, wealth, and influence. And so we made the decision that I would say I can't go to New York. And when the firm heard this, they said, well, that's a shame, because we can't make you head of the energy group. And I said, well, that's fine. I get along with everybody. Hire somebody. They can be in New York. I'll be on the West Coast. Well, those were kind of like, famous last words. They hired the most dishonest, disagreeable person that I've ever worked with, a person of enormous talent, but really just a bad guy. And my life was incredibly miserable for over a year. And finally, it became unbearable when he misrepresented my belief and that I wanted the firm to invest in a deal that we were working on. And he actually said that not because I believed it, but he wanted to try to use my reputation to get the deal done. And it was the straw that broke the camel's back for me when I heard about it. So I went to New York and went to see the head of the firm and the head of investment banking and said, I just can't do this. I'm sorry, I have to quit. And they were nice enough to say, well, no, don't quit, but go back to San Francisco and think of something to do. Well, that was very nice, but it's still not a position of power to be a minister without portfolio. So I came back to San Francisco, and the only thing I could think of to do there that wasn't already being done and that justified staying there was to help start a focus group on this emerging little industry called technology. And another guy and I started a group for a year, And I got to tell you, I knew nothing. But, you know, we went out and went to the conferences and did our homework and started reading. And about a year later, Dean Witter was starting to fail, and Goldman Sachs had decided to get into the investment banking business and technology. And they came and lo and behold, hired me to be their first person in Silicon Valley. And so it's kind of amazing to think I went from, you know, having to resign from the firm to being at the firm but having nothing to do, to being the first person in Silicon Valley for the greatest investment banking firm in the world at the beginning of the greatest industrial revolution in the world. And so you kind of go from like, how did that happen? What a deal. And I really look back though and say that I can't take credit for it, and I don't for a second believe that is happenstance. I really believe that that was the result of God moving in my life, and that it didn't have to be that I would get such a great event, and it could have been very good otherwise. But I do think that I don't think I would have had the courage to take any of those steps if I didn't believe that something or someone was there to take care of me. Now that came back to me, you know, outside the business world as well about a year and a half ago. I had a big birthday and we had this giant party and everybody said nice things about me. And I thought, God, this is great. And 3 days later, I was having a routine procedure and it identified that I had a condition in my heart called an aortic root aneurysm, which I didn't even know what it was, but I can assure you it's not good. It's when the walls of the aorta, the main blood vessel leaving your heart, start to weaken and kind of blow up like a balloon. I had no symptoms. I felt great. But if this bursts, it's pretty much instantly fatal. And so before I knew it, I was you know, headed to the hospital, and I had a major open heart surgery. And while I was having this open heart surgery, which was plenty complicated, I had other issues where my right coronary artery disintegrated. And so they did a bypass there. And the long and short of it was I was in surgery for 14.5 hours. And when I came out, I was not in great shape. And I was sedated for 3 days and sort of teetering on the edge during that period of time. And again, by the grace of God, I woke up. And when I woke up, you kind of feel a little bit of this post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I was so weak that I couldn't even swallow twice in a row. And I can guarantee you guys, I did not feel that I was in control of anything at that time. And it has been an incredible lesson for me. And you know, I've seen it also in my career with some of the people I've had the chance to work with. Bill Gates, smartest guy I ever met, and he would have been successful on some level anyway, anyhow. But yet, when Microsoft was still a fledgling and they were doing like a dinky little application and not much else, IBM was dominating the PC industry, and they decided to farm out an operating system, but they didn't go to Microsoft first. They went to a little company called Pacific Research, or Digital Research in Pacific Grove. And these guys, though, they were kind of like surfer types, and they were saying, wow, this sounds like a lot of work. It might get in the way. And so they said, no, I don't think we'll do it. And so IBM went up to Bellevue at that time, and Microsoft even then still hesitated a little bit, but they did it. And as I say, almost the rest is history, where Microsoft became one of the great companies in history. And so it's sort of interesting. Sure, it would have been somewhat successful and Bill would have been successful. But you know, Microsoft, really one of the most influential companies in the history of the world, and Bill has built a fortune rivaling anyone's. And you know, that hung by that thread about whether some, you know, kind of hippie guys in Pacific Grove took it or not. And the same thing happened with Steve Jobs. I met Steve when he was at his company Next after he'd been fired from Apple. And that company actually wasn't going to make it and go anywhere. And we were working with them. But lo and behold, the salvation of the company was that Apple Computer actually bought Next, brought Steve back. And Apple needed a new operating system at the time. And that's why they did it. But the amazing thing was Apple itself had just come through a period of enormous weakness. And we had worked with Apple and done a very large overnight convertible debenture in the $660 million range that kept them alive. But for quite some time before that, they had been either on the verge of being acquired and then, sort of have it fall through at the very last instant, or actually running out of money. I mean, like down to a week. And so it's just a miracle that Apple was still alive, to bring Steve back. Now, Steve had more charisma than any person I've ever seen, and you could cut the charisma with a knife, but still, he wasn't in control. Both of them, in this massive success that they enjoyed, were dependent upon just a very slender thread that went their way. So the third point I want to make about becoming a servant leader is that in addition to these first two things, that we need to find a sustainable process for personal character change. In this, Christian spiritual world, it's called spiritual formation, but it's true really kind of across the board, regardless of what your religious belief is. And I think, let me just talk a couple of things that I think are real practical. First of all, it requires focus. You've got to be thinking about this. Personal character change doesn't happen just by accident. And part of that focus is a process of reflection. The Jesuits have a very wonderful practice called the prayer of examen, in which Ignatius thought was the most important thing that they did, which was to every day examine their day and look at what happened in it and to analyze what was going on inside of them, etc. And a third item would be one that I pick it up again with the Scholars of Finance curriculum, is the importance of accountability. We just need somebody to cause us to admit to where we really are, to see where we really are, and to give us the strength to, once we fall down, to get back up. Another crucial thing, I think, is that we got to take care of ourselves. We got to stay healthy. We can't burn out. That doesn't lead to character development. And it's okay to have fun. One of my friends says, don't be afraid to invest in yourself. It's really key to be a healthy person. As part of that, one of the things that's meant the most to me over my career is that despite being tremendously engaged in Goldman Sachs, I did find some other significant activities in my life to help me balance the influences of work. And I think this is so key, that we don't just get so overwhelmed in one thing that we lose focus on what the bigger, broader world is. I would say for people of faith, prayer is a key. Christians believe that the greatest changes occur when God facilitates the change. And then there are various practices that work for pretty much everybody. Serving the needy tends to focus one's thinking. Retreats, times of silence, even fasting can help us become more vigilant and just be much more aware of where we are and what we need to do to become the people we want to become. So in conclusion, I think that becoming a servant leader and becoming a good person is a very tall order and really not easily achieved. Certainly not in a short period of time. It is a journey for sure. But if you pursue this goal, it will take a lifetime, but I'm convinced that it is one of the few goals worth giving your life to. So let me stop there and answer questions and on really any subject. And thank you very much for the chance to speak with you.
Wonderful. App, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you sharing your insight, your wisdom. I think one of the quotes that you had shared early on and just repeated again that really struck me personally was this notion that to become a good leader, first you must become a good person. And it's sometimes easy to forget that, right? That leadership can be, as you mentioned, a very introspective journey and a very introspective process. That it takes focus, it takes discipline, it takes investment. It doesn't just occur naturally, that we need accountability on the journey, that we need other people to keep us on the straight and narrow path. We oftentimes talk about that being one of the benefits of the leadership development program and of the chapter itself, is that our students are in this community, myself included, we're in this community of people who are all on that same journey and who we share a common language with and a common framework with. And I'm really curious, one question that we had submitted beforehand is, when you put yourself in the shoes of, you think you're 18, 19, 20, right? You're first, second, third year, fourth year in undergrad. You could give your 18-year-old, 19-year-old self some advice, right? If you could just sit yourself down and have the talk. You've largely done that tonight, but what else might you tell yourself to change or to think about and to orient towards servant leadership?
Well, I guess I'm also in one level, I kind of make my 3 points about understand yourself and then to commit yourself to change in the ways that I suggested. But I think that, one of the things to realize when you're 18 or 19 is you got the whole world before you. I think the other thing I would say is be patient, and that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I know a lot of people who really have just the greatest motives. They get very frustrated when they don't see change overnight, and when they maybe are doing well and then they, screw up and do something they're really ashamed of. So I think that what I would add then maybe is to be patient.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Eff. And one reminder, everybody, now that we're moving into open Q&A, just use the raise hand feature in the participant section over on the right to raise your hand and start asking after questions. And we'll take those as they come in the order they come in. And as those build, I'll ask one more. There's a few that we had come in from our students. George at NYU had asked, based on the lessons you've learned, what is some specific advice you could give someone starting in the finance industry? How might you localize some of this advice to someone entering finance?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One is, I think when you enter finance, it's typically, if you're in at least the service part of the business, as opposed to, say, being in a corporation where you may have a little different setup, it's pretty intense. And especially being a junior person is hard and demanding. And my observation is that despite everything that's been said about trying to make the lives of young people better, it's not that much better. It's hard. And so I would say, prepare yourself for it. Make sure you really love it. I mean, I like the ideas of internships and things like that, where you can really get a taste for it, because, finance can be brutal if you don't enjoy it, if it's not almost a calling. For me, it was. I loved it, and I hardly recommend it, but that would be one thing I would say. And the other is, I would just urge people that despite the pressures that they'll be under, and, I get it when you're there and you're young, you don't have much control over your life, but try to keep some control. I mean, get your exercise, get your sleep, and if you have to, tell the senior people, who I actually have found, I think, would be fairly sympathetic. That doesn't mean to whine or anything like that, but I just think that it's important to take care of yourself.
Great. Thanks, Eff. We have some hands going up. Top of the queue is Dennis Franklin. Dennis, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Sure. How are you, sir? My name is Dennis Franklin. I'm a first year at Columbia University. Earlier you were speaking about how when you left to New York, there was somebody took over who wasn't necessarily the right fit for the job and was not the best version of a leader. And I was thinking about that, and I know that oftentimes that does come up, in which doing the right thing isn't necessarily the best decision for making the most money, or so like doing the wrong thing can sometimes have more of a benefit and monetary value than doing the right thing. And I was just wondering how you can kind of keep a good conscience and understand that at the end of the day, doing the right thing will pay off in the long run, and understanding that it's not always, you can't always be thinking in the moment, I guess.
Well, thank you for your question, and I think it's a very good one. I would say you're well on your way, because you're recognizing that that it is a trade-off. And at Goldman, we had a saying, be long-term greedy, not short-term greedy. And the whole ethos of the firm, which was very much about making money, was still thinking about the long-term is likely to yield the greatest rewards. And our first business principle is that the client's interests always come first. And so I think the firm actually adopted, not that it never slipped and failed, but really adopted this sort of longer term attitude that you can make more, or certainly have a better life in the long term. Sometimes people can make so much money that you'd think it would be great, but in fact it's not. Because the problem with wealth is that it can be a good thing, but it never really satisfies. And one of my great stories that I have loved is that John D. Rockefeller started, the Standard Oil, and has put together the greatest fortune of modern times. And so I've seen it estimated that in today's dollars it would be $400 or $500 billion. And there was a precocious young reporter from the New York Times who went to him and said, "Mr. Rockefeller, you have a lot of money. Do you think it's enough?" And he said, "Absolutely not." And she turned to him and said, "Well, that's quite surprising. How much is enough?" And his answer was, "Just a little bit more." And it's really this thing that if we can just kind of think about it, remind ourselves of it, and also hang out with people who share similar values, maybe we can hold on to that truth, because there will be temptations to forget about it, as you suggest.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thanks, Dennis. Arvind, you were next in the queue.
Hello, Mr. Martin. My name is Arvind Sriram. I'm currently in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm part of the NYU chapter and I'm a first year. And my question is, this is something that I've been struggling with ever since we've moved to remote basically everything. But as a leader during this time, how do you make sure that you continue to personally deepen your relationships with your peers, your clients, and even your friends and family?
In this COVID-19 environment?
Yes.
Well, I would say that that's one of the great frustrations. I think I actually aspire to just trying to maintain them, at least in the short run. And so I would say this, at the beginning of it, it was a little bit like shock. Okay, you just kind of just vegetated for a while, at least I did. And then I began to sort of see, well, we're going to be in this for a while, you better start doing it. So one of the actual pluses is that I use Zoom a lot more now than before, when I just would call somebody on the phone. We started doing things like setting up family phone conversations. There's 3 kids in our family with various family members and grandchildren and whatnot. And so we get to talk and see each other a little bit. We're not able to go be with them in person, other than one daughter who lives nearby, and we'll go on socially distanced walks and things like that. I try to email people, call people. I even made a list of the 10 folks that I really want to try to stay close to. Funny thing is that I'm actually, when we go out and walk around where we live now, I'm seeing people that I haven't seen in a long time, and it's really great. But I got to tell you, I don't, it is just a hard time. And as great as this is, it's no substitute, for having a glass of wine together and, hugging and handshaking and whatever. And so we just got to, I think we just got to make do the best we can.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Arvind. Cristina, do you want to ask your question next?
Sure. So hi, my name is Cristina Rackley. I'm a sophomore at Northwestern University. First off, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to speak to us today and share your insights. And I was wondering, like, after we finish up with this speaker series, if there are any books or podcasts that you would recommend in regards to finance, as well as how to kind of grow both spiritually and like your personal character.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them kind of in both areas. In the how to grow your character category, you know, I referenced Henry Nouwen. That actually came from a book he wrote called Life of the Beloved. And if you go on YouTube and just put in Henry Nouwen, Life of the Beloved, there's actually a video of him from some years back. He's dead now. Talking about it, and there's 8 different segments. Segments 1 and 2 are the best ones, but that's a fabulous one. I'd be happy to try to sit down with Ross and maybe put together a list of videos and podcasts, that sort of thing, for you on both the finance side as well as the character side.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eff. I've watched those videos per Eff's recommendation, and I was really struck. 16 minutes to watch the first 2 sessions. And yeah, happy to get together, Eff, and put together a list of resources. For everyone on the call, we've actually started building the SOF recommended reading list. So we can share that out actually soon with everybody on the call. And Eff, would love to get your input on it too and pull some podcasts together. We have a lot more questions coming in. Sonny Sun, do you want to go next?
Hey, yeah, sure thing. So once again, my name is Sonny Sun. I'm currently a rising junior at NYU Stern. So in this digital age, we have leadership in all these varied forms. You know, we can do things remotely, as we have seen through these different Zoom calls. What would you say right now are important digital trends that leaders can hop onto in order to motivate and designate other people as, you know, potential motivators for their own work?
Digital tools?
Yes, digital tools, technologies that are appearing and rapidly expanding that we should keep our eyes on.
Sure. Well, of course, we're using, you know, one of the foremost ones right now.
Exactly.
But I would say that a couple of the groups I'm involved with have really started to build their Slack communities and made it's actually a very good way of drawing people together. And you can sort of do, you know, Slack light or Slack really serious. And Slack really serious takes some work, but I've been quite impressed in what that has done. So that would be the other one besides Zoom that's come immediately to mind. I do think that one thing that's got to happen is, you know, we're going to have this, and, you know, it's really important for the technology to be good. For instance, you know, I listen to a lot of different maybe concerts or church services or whatever. And if they play music, I love music. And so, but if they play music and it's all scratchy and it doesn't sound very good, it's almost worse than nothing at all. So I would say that development of widely available higher bandwidth is going to be crucial. Now, I would guess that most of us on this call have access to that, but I think it's something that is getting a lot of focus now about being more broadly available.
Awesome. Thanks, Sonny, for the question. And we actually do use Slack and Zoom now as our 2 primary tools. So, and we use Slack heavy. We are not Slack light. I think everyone on this call probably chuckled a little bit when you brought up Slack. We do a lot of it at SOF. Chris, you're next.
Good evening, Mr. Martin. First off, I just wanted to say thank you. You know, an interesting point you're bringing up in terms of servant leadership. I'm halfway through Hank Paulson's book, On the Brink. And when you're in those leadership positions, you know, how can you really wrap your mind around making the best decisions for you know, the betterment of people in terms of finance and economics, and make sure to understand your rationale when things are coming at you in such a short duration?
Well, I'd say this. Truthfully, you do the best you can. I was pretty close to Hank. I've talked to him numerous times about what it was like. And he was under enormous, enormous pressure. We almost lost the entire financial system, which would have created absolute chaos. Just think if nobody could get their money out of a bank because the banks had all failed. And you know, how many then further failures there would be. And you know, when Hank was unable to get a deal together to save Lehman, you know, he really went. He was sick, physically sick, quite a bit of the time. The stress was so much, and he went back into his office in a private place and called his wife Wendy, and who's a very devout person. And Wendy just said, "Keep the faith, don't panic, do your best." And if you think about it, all you really can do is your best. And see, one of the things that I think is so important about building your character while you can is that we need to be able to do the right thing under enormous stress. Now, if I told you you're going to be in a car and you're going to be driving down the street and a car is going to come and cut in front of you and make a rude hand gesture to you, and I want to see how you respond, and then we go out and do it, well, you'd be, you know, like, this is going to happen. Okay, the guy would do that. And you'd go, no problem. Have a good day, like that. But when you're not expecting it, when all of a sudden, you know, problems arise that you didn't see out of nowhere, and you have no time to do anything besides react instinctively, it really pays to have the right instincts. And, you know, the great thing about Hank is that he was a very principled person. He had a lot of practice in tough times, but none this tough. But it stood him well. And, you know, the stories about, you know, one of his biggest things was he had to convince Nancy Pelosi to pass, you know, TARP, which then morphed. But, you know, he went in there, he got down on a knee when she was sitting in a chair and said, "You've got to do this." And that isn't the way we normally thought of Hank. But I mean, you know, the guy, he just did what was the right thing. And I really appreciate that. And so anyway, I think part of it was that he was ready. I mean, God help us if most other people had been doing that job.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. And if you have a chance, please let Hank know. Thank you for the insight on this book. It's actually a really good read. So. Yeah,
he's a great guy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Eff. Eugene, I see you're next. You want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, Ms. Martin. My name is Eugene Chun. I'm studying business administration at Berkeley Haas. And before I answer my question, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your evening. I'm sure you're really busy, but as a Christian myself, I really appreciate hearing the experiences of faithful leaders as yourself, and you really do encourage young students. And so something that really stood out to me in your discussion was your talk around being a servant first and a leader second. And you reiterated by talking a little bit about experiencing or interacting with those who were leaders first, or kind of in your words, those who strove after power, personal gain, before the interests of others. And so my question is, how did you reconcile, one, your desire to practice servant leadership and the very real possibility of witnessing others surpass you in the professional environment because you wanted to stick to your ideals of servant leadership? You mentioned how important it was for you to develop your own personal interests. And so I was just wondering, like, what was one practical thing you did in the professional setting that allowed you to kind of compromise or reconcile those two conflicting ideas?
Well, let me start backwards. In terms of the things that I did, that I got involved in, well, I'm an absolute sports nut. And so I really, did a lot of different physical activities. I can't help myself. I watched it. I was involved. The other thing that I did was I made a commitment in our church to be involved, and that proved to be very helpful. And then the other thing I did was I did try to get involved in a number of nonprofit, sort of community service things. And the great thing about that, when I was at Goldman, my job really was to go introduce Goldman Sachs to companies, convince them to use Goldman Sachs, and then to be the senior client relationship person in all the things they did. And so it was, kind of a marketing the firm role. Therefore, I could, by being involved in certain things, like I was on the board of the San Francisco Symphony for many years and loved that. And, I would meet other leaders and in the CEOs, and it would just give a way of bonding with people. And, there's, sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not. But those were all helpful, though, because they just helped me realize that there's a real big world out there beyond investment banking or beyond finance. And it was really important when I finally retired that I had those things to rely on rather than sitting around saying, God, what do I do next? Now, one of the things, going to your first question about realizing that others may surpass you, well, one of the things you got to do is just make your peace with that to begin with, that what's important is to do the right thing and then live with it. And that's why I said, it would be hard if you thought I'm going to do the right thing and my life is going to be ruined because of it. And I think that's why, your belief in a higher power or somehow coming to an understanding about how life works, that it's okay to do the right thing, because in the long run, in the end, it will be better, is really crucial.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eff. I appreciate that. I think that's an interesting question to explore. Like, do I think that if I do the right thing, my life it will yield negative results? It's kind of an interesting thought exercise that some of us might want to try over the weekend. I think I will. With 7 minutes left, we have Mason with his hand raised. If somebody else wants to ask a final question after that, we'll get it to you if we have time. So Mason, why don't you go next?
Hi, Mr. Martin. I'm Mason Tagg. I'm a junior at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. So a question I had, and it alludes to your last point, is, so how do you confront a senior individual as a junior individual when there's an ethical issue that's about to be made or it already has been made?
Well, I would say that first of all, you got to decide whether it's your job to confront the senior person. Now, especially if it's already been made. One of the things, it was really interesting. When leverage buyouts first got started, we had an effort start within Goldman to try to buy the tobacco part, or Reynolds Tobacco. And my dad had died as a direct result of smoking, and it left a permanent impression on me. And I mean, I really, really, really hated this. And I was a partner at the time, though. And so I had a little bit of standing. And I went and I said, as gently as I could, that I hope they would consider that. That aspect. Fortunately, it turned out we didn't do it. And but one of the things, we've got to be careful with also in these ethical issues is presuming that, we're right and they're wrong all the time. I think we've got to approach people giving them respect. Now, it may very well be that we're right and they're wrong, but we still, sort of the self-righteous, I'm going to tell you what to do, is not a very effective strategy. Whether it's in politics or whether it's in a corporation or anywhere else. And then the other thing is, I actually feel like sometimes to say something to a person or in a company, you need to have gained the standing for it. For instance, let's say that there was someone in your work group that you thought had a very bad aspect of their personality or the way they were conducting themselves. You know, it wouldn't be very good if the very first time you ever spoke to them and you went up and said to them, "I've noticed this about you and you really should shape up." It wouldn't work. I mean, like, who the hell are you? Is sort of the way that person would think. And so I think you got to, one, make sure you've got the standing, and two, when you say something, you need to say it the right way. Now, if it comes to a general ethical issue where they're asking you to do something that you don't think you can do in your heart, well, then you've got to stand up. And ultimately, that's what I had to do when my name was being used as being in favor of this investment for the firm, which it wasn't. So.
Great. Thanks, Eff. I think we have 3 minutes left. We'll take one more question. We might just go 1 or 2 minutes over time here. But Rory, you want to ask the last question today?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. And thanks, Mr. Martin, for being here today. I really appreciate it. It's good to hear your wisdom. My question was kind of in reference to something you said earlier, which is like when you can build character. And then later on, you talked a little bit about those kind of exercises of character. So you gave the example of being in a car and like you have in that moment the choice to like either be nice to the person that kind of like flips you off or, you know, maybe say something crass, right? And I'm interested in that distinction between like building character and then like exercises of character. And particularly, I'm interested in when you're building character, how can you translate that into exercises of character? So like for me, maybe it's, you know, a quote pops into my mind when I'm like making a decision. It's like, okay, this is what like, you know, some stoic would have done, or some like this is a quote from the Bible or something like that. So I'm interested in that translation from building character to exercises of character and how you kind of translate one into the other.
Well, there's a couple of things. One is we know scientifically that we can reprogram our neural pathways. And it's a big now area of medical investigation. And so the whole idea that you mentioned about having studied, having filled your mind with the kind of things that you think are important actually will help change the way you think about things. And that's a hugely important point. The other thing is to practice doing what it is that you'd like to do. And for instance, you know, maybe it's just going out and consciously serving the poor as a way of kind of understanding more where people are coming from and the problems that they're facing. So you might not be so judgmental if you ran into someone who, you know, is struggling or didn't act the way you wanted. That's where I think that kind of on both levels, that by training your mind and then by actually going out and doing things that you make yourself ready for crisis moments.
Awesome. Thanks for the great question, Rory, and thanks, Eff, for the answer. I mean, at this point, we're about a minute to time, so we'll transition into closing remarks and announcements. If everyone can just stick around for 3 more minutes. First and foremost, Eff, I want to thank you sincerely on behalf of all of Scholars of Finance for joining us this week and sharing your wisdom with us. At Scholars of Finance, as you know, our mission is to be and develop the next generation of finance leaders that have character, integrity, and serve the greater good. And you've definitely helped us advance that today. Over the weekend, everybody, I want to invite all of us to set aside some time and ask ourselves how we can build character this weekend, and set aside time for that, and ask ourselves how we can go and serve others and actually make a plan, put a plan in place, like Eff said, actually commit to that change and to take the action we can now. So with that, let's all give Eff another warm round of applause. If you want to turn on your camera, unmute your mic, and just clap for Eff and say thank you. Eff,
thank you,
very,
guys.
very much for joining us. One thing we'd like to do with our guests is take a group photo of the Zoom call. So if everyone can quickly turn on your camera, we are going to shift to gallery view. Get ready to say cheese. And Jake, one of our management intern members, will take a screenshot for us. Jake, take it away.
Okay, I'm just going to count down from 3. So on 1, just smile for me, all right? Okay, I'm ready. 3, 2, 1. All right, I got it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jake. To everybody on this call, as always, we want to make our national speaker series as impactful as possible. And we'd love your feedback on the format and content. And we're also going to have a bit of a surprise for Eff that you could partake in. So you should see an email in your inbox with a survey link, just a handful of questions. One student will get $20 for filling that out. Executives and professionals, feel free to check that out too. Eff, I'll share this news with you as well. Some exciting news. Next week, we will have Bob Dahl as our speaker for the week. Bob Dahl is the chief investment strategist at Nuveen, was one of the chief investment officers at BlackRock for a long period of time, and he'll also share his story. So look out for the invite tomorrow morning for Bob Dahl. Eff, we'd love to have you join us as well. Eff, thank you again for your time. We would love to have you back again to share more of your insights and experience. Everyone, thank you for coming. And as true scholars of finance, let's all go forth this week and serve others and act with character and integrity. Take care, stay safe, and be well.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.